Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. This episode is sponsored by Paris Costumes International. Today's guest is a costume designer best known for Roma, the Deuce, Spectre, and her latest project is Alejandro Inarritu's Bardo, false chronicle of a handful of truths, Mexico's Oscar selection. It is unlike anything its director has attempted before. In crafting the story of Mexican-born, Los Angeles-based journalist Silverio Gama, it has crafted a dreamlike, poetic, and surreal story, both intimate and epic, that could easily be called Inarritu's most personal film. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome costume designer Ana Terrazas to the Designing Hollywood Show. Ana, I don't know if I rolled my R's enough. Terrazas! It's great to have you here on the Designing Hollywood Show. Welcome to the show. I'm just very excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here with you and have this conversation. Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, I've been fascinated by the rise. Of course, we hear a lot in America. We've got three gentlemen who've really broken through, and they're all masters of their craft. Inarritu, Cuarón, and of course, Guillermo del Toro, kind of like the Three Musketeers of Mexico that have really kind of changed filmmaking. And I'm just curious, what's in the water in Mexico? Did you grow up? Is there like a secret film cabal of film fans, film fanatics in Mexico that have given rise to this unbelievable talent pool down right below the United States here in Hollywood?
I wish there was that water, and if it is, let me know where I can find it. No, but I do think, as you just mentioned, I think it's Mexicans have, in a way, like a very kind of passion and hunger, to be out there, to say things, and luckily we had the Three Musketeers, as you just called them. They are giving us an example that we can do those things, because Mexican cinemas, sometimes we don't have the biggest budgets to do our films or anything like that, but we have a huge voice. And I think there's an amazing, talented people around. Like right now, I do feel like it's the Mexican boom, of cinema. There's so many great actors, great directors, great production designers, great photographers. Rodrigo Prieto, El Chivo. There's this school, and I think it's also, I don't know, it's part of our country, it's part of our culture, and I'm really honored that I could be part of this Mexican boom of cinema.
Oh, and it's not just, it's world class, it's world caliber. All of your filmmakers, the directors, the cinematographers have risen. Some of the greatest work that's being done in film, if not now, then perhaps ever. And the quality of the talent is amazing. Now, I'm curious, was there something when you were growing up, was perhaps like in America, like I remember seeing Star Wars, and it sort of changed people's perceptions of what fantasy filmmaking could do. Was there something in Mexico when you were growing up that might have sparked you to want to work in cinema? Was there a film that came out that might have influenced all of this new talent pool that we've seen over the last couple of decades?
Listen, I was born in Mexico, but I wasn't born in the city. I was born in a tiny town away from the city, which is like an hour away, and it's called Tepoztlán, Morelos. And my parents moved there. It's at the countryside, and back in that time, there was like no TV. We couldn't I actually always felt kind of like apart from all the kids at school, because I couldn't watch the same cartoons that they were watching. I would just play in the river and in the trees. And what my parents will do, they would show us films, So we had every night and the weekends, we all sit down as a family and watch films. And I think my passion comes from that, and to kind of analyze the films and talk about them and with my parents and my siblings. And when I grew up, after I moved to the city when I was around 12, 13, and even like I remember going into high school and there were all these questionnaires about like all the different cartoons. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I can tell you more about the film or something like so. I guess that's where my passion came in, which I wasn't aware when I was a kid, but I could say it was through that, and it was through also the push of my parents of the art world. We were always looking at books, and so yeah, I think for me it was different, maybe from other people that grew up in the city.
Now, did you have favorite films when you were a kid? Are there a few films that you were touchstones for you that you remember?
Because that I can think of right now, no. I mean, I remember watching like, I mean, my parents will put us also like films like Kurosawa, and like things
Right.
like that to think, and it made an impact, like it really made us think and understand what these directors were saying. It wasn't just like, let's just watch a soap opera. It was more into, again, the art of filmmaking. And my parents are not filmmakers at all, but they love cinema as well.
Now, how did you, a lot of the costume designers I talk to on this show have pretty rigorous academic backgrounds, studying art history and color, or they apprenticed at early ages in the theater. How did you find yourself moving into costume design? And was it something you knew you wanted to get into?
No, I mean, I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with clothes and textiles. I've been always kind of fascinated by that. And when I graduated, I was able to go to London and started my sort of foundation in art and design at Central St. Martin's. And that's where I discovered that what I wanted to do, it was more into the fashion world. Saying that, I moved to New York and study fashion at Parsons.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, and when I finished my career, I start designing in New York for Bill Blass and start designing there. But I found myself that I was sad, that it wasn't really what I was looking for, and the environment, I didn't see myself there. So I came back to Mexico, kind of like not knowing what was missing, and a friend of mine called me. I was like, listen, I have this play. Do you want to come and assist? I was like, yeah, sure. And as soon as I read the script, I mean, it was cabaret, but we all know that the play.
Sure.
But as soon as I got into it and I read it, for me it was boom, this is what I want, I was like, this is where my passion is. I can design for this character. So I got into theater. And then there I started in TV, and then I moved on into the movies and cinema. But it was starting with fashion, then theater, TV, and then starting to
Well,
be in the film.
Yeah, you have I love some of the early things that you worked on, stuff like Miss Bala. These are things that I actually saw in a theater, so
Nice.
yeah, and I noticed suddenly in 2012, you did Get the Gringo, and you're working with Mel Gibson. Were you starstruck at all? Like, here's a guy who's an Academy Award winning director. He's been a movie star for decades, all the way back into the 70s in Australia with Peter Weir. Were you like, what was it like being on a set with movie stars all of a sudden? Was that something that you were affected by? Because Mel Gibson's huge. Like, it doesn't get much bigger.
Yeah, huge. No, I actually, I mean, I think like every project is different. When I got offered Get the Gringo, again, I read the script, and then I met Mel, and all the conversations that we had, it was like immediately like we felt like common people. I wasn't like, oh my God, this is Mel, and I feel like it was also kind of the same language that I wanted to like put in the film, the designs and everything that I was thinking about the film. He was into it, so it didn't felt at all like intimidating, and I really like to work with the directors and the actors like really closely, because then if not, I feel like we're not doing a film, I'm just like on my own, an entity by itself. So yeah, and that after doing Que Te Gringo, I finally got an agent, and I was like, oh my God, this is an agent. And then there's the door open. I was like, wow, there's another world out there,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me because you've done both period work, and then after Get the Gringo, as we were talking about earlier, you did a science fiction film that I was particularly knocked out by, called Europa Report. And, I remember watching that film just because I'll watch any science fiction, fantasy, or horror film. But when I watched Europa Report, I was really struck by the authenticity of the film. All the technology, all the space suits, the costuming in that film. I know the budget was low, but it felt very authentic. And I was curious in that when you approach something like that, going from a Get the Gringo to a Europa Report, how much research was involved? Did you look at other science fiction films with that kind of material? How did all of that come about for you?
Yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, I was intimidating by Mel. I wasn't. I was intimidated by Europa Report. Like it was my first film coming to the U.S. to design something that I have never even had a clue on how to do it. So for me, I had to do a huge research. I got into the books, into the films. I became like a nerd of trying to understand what was the NASA. We started talking to Global. I went to LA, look at all the different outfits. And then from there, I started designing. I was like, I have no idea if I can pull this off. Like I have ideas, but I don't know how to build them. So it was a huge challenge and a beautiful challenge and a beautiful lesson in how to do also this film, as you said, with a low budget, but also to be real. We really put every detail into every costume, working with Eugenio Caballero, that I had worked before with him, and helping each other, and Sebastián Cordero, which he's an amazing director. I think for all of us, it was a new genre that we were working on, and together as a team, we were helping each other and to get the best research. Luckily, we had an amazing cast that helped us as well a lot. And we worked with beautiful people from LA and from New York, doing the gloves and understanding how space works, And yeah, I mean, I really had a lot of fun, but I was really, really stressed for the first time in my life.
Well, when you begin a project like that, how does your research begin? Obviously, you read a script. Do you find your way in through the characters, through the period? Where do you begin? How does your process start?
Depending in which project, but normally how I start, I read the script. I imagine immediately the actors. The first thing that comes to me, either period or contemporary, it's kind of colors. I go more for colors and textures, and how I imagine the entire film through color. For instance, Roma, right? That was black and white. Even though it was black and white, I imagined the film in color.
Sure.
And I learned throughout the film and with everybody else to look at the colors in different way, because then you need to translate them into the gray scale, right? So that's my first approach. And then once I have those ideas, which I start writing them down, I start making sketches. I like to draw a lot, make notes. I go into books. I love photography, and that's like my key, that goes with me, to look of the textures that I want to use, the environments. I worked a lot with the production design as well. But it's basically books. It's also going to watch films that have touch about the same theme that we're doing. The internet, it's kind of tricky sometimes, more like in a period thing, like you can find something, but maybe it's not that right. So more than anything, it's more books where I go to.
Interesting. Do you have like Roma was such a knockout film. I mean, it was it's funny when I saw it in the theater, and then when it started to stream, I started watching it. I must have watched it like 6 or 7 times. It was so hypnotic, and it's such a beautiful piece of work. When you start work on something like that, obviously it's such a personal work for the director. I mean, it's basically his life. And when you start working on that kind of a project, how does your relationship with the director begin, and how does that develop? And on a film like this, and obviously in Bardo, do you develop a long-term relationship with the director, because the work that you're doing here is so personal to them? And how do you get into their headspace?
Yeah, I mean, with Roma, I had the huge conversation with Cuarón. To be honest, there was the script. Nobody could read it. I couldn't read the script. I never read the script, to be honest with you. And what I had with him, he called me one day. He's like, "I want you to do a film. Come and meet me for a coffee." Well, a coffee was about 6 hours, me writing every scene that he was describing, right? I ended with a book like this, a notebook full of all the notes that we were talking, that then I gave to the AD, because nobody could see the script. It was just in his mind. So they're like, "What did he say?" I was like, "Here you go, baby. I mean, just do a breakdown of all these ideas." So after that conversation, which really, it lasted like 6 hours, 7 hours, I went on my own and started a huge research. I mean, obviously, his film is very personal. He told me the story of his nana, his siblings, his mom, how they used to dress. He showed me some photos. But then apart from that, we're talking about Mexico and the country,
Right.
And so it was a huge research on my side as well of how was in the 70s, all these different social classes that we're talking about. So that was like a very beautiful and amazing process of just researching and getting all these ideas and giving more, and then designing, like he would remember the typical sweater that his brother was wearing. So we will have to find that photo, and then I would have to make all the drawings. And he's like, "No, it didn't have a deer, it had a cow." And I was like, okay, so we would have to build a lot just to get into the correct shape and pattern, and then on top of that, it was black and white. So then we had to go. Sometimes he would say, like, "It was red." I'm like, "Yeah, but we're doing in black and white, so we needed to use it." Like sometimes we even were forgetting that we were shooting in black and white, because he would remember in color. So yeah, it was really funny, and you end up establishing a very close relationship with the director. I mean, I feel like if I don't, then I'm not happy. Like, I feel like I'm always, I don't know, for instance, Bardo, for me, if Alejandro, the captain, which I adore and I admire, and working in this film with him, he invited us, his team, the head department, Eugenio, Darius Conji, which is the most beautiful photographer, and myself, to all be part of his mind, and what he wanted to say, and made us part of it. Like, he was, yes, I would say the captain, but he will listen, and he will encourage us to bring more, and that's, I think, the relation and the beauty about doing cinema, to really work as a team, in order to create what you're reading, the script, and to get into the director's head and vision.
Well, yeah, and what a Darius Kanji too. That brings up the one of the interesting things, and I think it probably was this way with Roma too. How closely do you work with the director of photography and the production designer to sort of work together to create the look of the film? Do you consult with the director of photography long beforehand and the production designer as well? Do you work in tandem with them?
I
How,
do. I do. And I'm a person that in every new project that I go in, that's my first question. Who's the DP? Who's the production designer? I need to know them. We need to have a meeting, because for me, it's really important where these actors are going to be. What are you thinking? You know what I mean? Like, and also how are we shooting? Which lenses are we using? How you're planning to do this? For instance, with Bardo, like I have worked again with Eugenio, which is we call each other our partners in crime, because sometimes when we do a project that we're not together, we're like, where are you? I miss you. Like we need to talk, and we we work like so close, and Darius was an essential part and one of the photographers that I just want to work with all my life in every project, and especially in Bardo. Every texture, every color, I would go to him and say, what do you think? How do you feel? Should we go more green and more Bardo, which is a film that it's all about color, we did so many different camera tests for Silverio to choose the correct color green jacket, and down more blue, more yellow. So I feel like if we don't work all together, then our craft it doesn't look as well. Like you need to know exactly what you're doing with the other peers.
well, and especially Darius Kanji is one of the great. I mean, I remember seeing David Fincher's Seven for the first time, and I was just unbelievable. What a knockout in terms of the cinematography in that film. It was almost next level. And then he can go and shoot a comedy for Woody Allen like Midnight in Paris that is incredibly beautiful, but it looks nothing like Seven.
Yeah.
He truly is a magician. And I would imagine that on Bardo, I've seen a reel of it. I've seen a promotional reel, and I can't wait to see this movie. It opens not this weekend, but next weekend in Los Angeles, and I can't wait to see this film. And the colors, like you said, the costumes, it looks just so lush and so much fun. And how many costumes did you make for Bardo?
Thousands and thousands
Yeah,
and
I was
thousands.
just gonna say, my God.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, when I talked to Alejandro the first time, he was like, "Yeah, it's a very tiny Mexican film." Huh? Zero tiny. but what I'm saying, it's like I don't know. It's this project that it needed to be that way. Like it couldn't be done different. Like we needed all that background, and one of the things that I like to talk to about is background, how important it is in a film, and that was something that Alejandro and I were immediately in the same page to say, if you have a background over there that is looking at the camera or walking weird or something, it just ruins the entire scene,
Yeah.
or if he's dressed badly, So, so yeah, I think here in this film and in Roma, in every film that I try to do, I put as much attention to the principles as to the background, um, yeah, I think this film is all about that. Is all about the color, and I feel like, as you're saying, like Darius, he can, he's fantastic. He can change his view, his artwork so much depending where he is, depending the director that he's working with. I mean, I remember he came into the project and immediately, just because of walking the streets of Mexico City, he knew what he wanted to do.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting because he's Iranian, I believe,
Yeah.
and so the what he brings. I mean, the cross. What I really love about all of especially about these Mexican filmmakers that you have this rich culture, but color itself is such a part of Mexico, and I think that when I was growing up, the only Mexican movies I saw were the Santos, the Santos and the vampires and all that. But even as a kid, I loved all the color. There was something about it was always so vibrant, and it looks like in Bardo there is so much use of color.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and as I said earlier to you, like that's my first approach always when I read a script. Like I always imagine the actors and colors and the mood. This film in particular, we're not just talking about Silverio's journey. We're talking also about a man that left a country, for another country, and then it's his comeback to Mexico and how he remembered Mexico, because it's all through his memories or reality or surreality.
Right.
So that was the first, because for me, like this script, when I read it, it's such an complex script that I was like, how the costumes are going to help to get all this to be real and to the spectator to make it understand where we are, So we decided to do it through color because it's also talking about Mexico. And I mean, Mexico, it's as you're saying, it's an explosion of color in their arts and crafts and their textiles. Everywhere is color. You go to market, everything is color. But here again, we're using that, but in a very constrained way. We also decided to take some colors away because it would have been too much, or we decided to take, for instance, a lot of the prints out, which also Mexico is full of prints and textures because it was making all the scenes dirty. So it was really challenging, and walking little by little, designing each kind of atmosphere in the film and putting a color palette and deciding the things that we wanted, the things that we didn't want to see in the film. So I think is that for me was a beautiful way to design Bardo.
So were there did you lean on various textiles, not just color, but the kind of fabrics you used to delineate between reality and unreality and memory and history? Was that part of your design process, changing in the actual quality of the fabrics and things like that?
So we didn't change that much the quality of the fabrics. We did edit one fabric, which is called denim. Basically, we decided to edit denim all in the entire film except with the migrants, because we needed to be truth to the migrants. The way they dress, they're crossing the desert, they need a thicker fabric. But we decided to take out the denim, all our background and all our principles, because they were making a more ordinary character. And what we wanted to create, it was a more iconic and oniric character. So what we decided to do, instead of using like the different textiles that you're saying, it was mixing different period of clothing of the 20th century up to now, because it's also the memories of a man that it's about to turn 60 or 59, so we went back to the 60s, to the 70s, to the 80s, and all the combinations and all the colors also through those eras, and not just dressing up people in the 60s. Combine those in a very subtle way in order to the spectator always kind of feels like, where am I? Am I in the sick? Am I here? So that's how we wanted to add our put into the surrealism.
Well, we didn't touch on this, but one of the things that you also worked on that I thought you did a phenomenal job was the TV series The Deuce. That your work on that show, the costuming was perfect. I mean, it was incredible the way you that must have been a fun show to work on. But man, but the clothes in that series were spot on. I mean, the authenticity that you were able to achieve through costume in that series was just phenomenal. And so I would imagine you had a pretty good idea about where to go to get the kind of clothing that I mean, that was New York in the early 70s, early mid 70s, or actually into the 80s, but still you did such a great job with period that way. And it's interesting to hear you say that you subtly were going away, you were mixing and matching periods to add to that to create more of a surrealistic feel to it all. I love that you did that. Now let me ask you, was that something that you came up with, or?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, when we start doing like all the normally I do like a huge mood, and a huge presentation that I discuss with Alejandro, and obviously I send it to Caballero and Darius as well, to present my ideas, and that's where I start mixing different times and if your periods, and just saying what happens if we start mixing this. And so what we were doing, all the background fittings, we realized that it was making sense, and that we loved this weird combinations. And as the opposite as on the Deuce, that was like in the 70s, it was like a period show as well. But now that you mentioned that, I really like to say something that there in that precisely show that I love, I adore. I was so excited that I got that job because when I read the script, I was like, I need to design this. For me, designing that show, it was very important as well where the actors were going to be. This dirtiness of New York in the 70s, and I wanted for the costumes where when you were seeing the film, the show, you could smell the costumes. So we worked so much in aging and dyeing, and we designed a lot, because we couldn't find the pieces that I want in order to give this dirtiness and smell. And we burned the jackets. We put like so many things like cigarettes, and the actors was like, oh, I was like, doesn't matter, like you have to wear it that way. And I think, that's the passion that I have, and that's what we're thinking. Like when you read something, like you really immediately you smell it, you see it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so with Bardo, like I love this idea that you came up with. So that shows how filmmaking really is a synergistic relationship that you have between artists. Inarritu has to trust you enough to allow you to make that kind of a choice. And that's a lot of responsibility. Do you ever feel sometimes that it's overwhelming?
Completely overwhelming. And it's always, as you said, it's a huge responsibility that we have, to really be true to his vision, to our own vision as well. And if as you're saying, if we weren't the right people in the right time together, this couldn't have happened, and the trust that he had in all of us, and the trust that we have in between us. And I feel it's one of the projects that I feel that happen immediately. There are other projects that it takes a little bit, to warm up, to understand. They don't know you. But here, it's my first time working with Iñárritu, and he immediately opened the door and left himself, and believed in us. And I think that's a beauty of this project. And there's other projects like that, like the Deuce as well, with George Pelicanos and David Simon. It was the same. They believed it.
And those guys, I mean, they've done such great work in the past. And the thing is, you didn't make it easy. I mean, the people that you're working with are at the top of their game. I mean, you're working for the best, and when you do that, it's incredible. Like you think, like I remember, like The Revenant. It was watching that film. I didn't even know how do you make that. How does that even get done? And Birdman, jumping into Bardo, and then it becomes personal, something like that for you. Like, do you ever get to the point where, like, do you ever go to the people that you work? Well, tell me about your crew. Like, how do you put together the crew to do a movie like Bardo? How many people do you need in your crew, and who are some of your principals? And do you cut yourself, or do you do do you make any of the costumes yourself, or do you have a crew? Do you have like a favorite dressmaker in Italy that you go to or something?
Yeah, I mean, normally now that I have been working between the two countries, US and Mexico, I have a beautiful crew in New York and a beautiful one here in Mexico. I met an amazing assistant designer that became one of my best friends, Hannah Shea, that she's in New York. Without her, it's like, it's not the same. Now she's not working with me. She's in New York doing another show. But yeah, I normally work with her and with another assistant, Claudia, here in Mexico. So they're like my two right hands. And my tailors are always the same in New York and in Mexico, that I have been working with them for the past almost 15 years here in Mexico and less in New York. I found them later after doing Europa Report. So I always try to, every time I have a project, I always call them immediately to say, please just come and do this show. So I work with a supervisor here in Mexico as well. I normally not build anything myself anymore because I don't have that much time.
Right.
It's either design or a meeting or fitting or this. But yeah, so for Bardo, it wasn't. People always ask me like, how many people you had in your team? I was like, you thought we had 1,000? No, we didn't. I always also have an amazing crew for background fittings, that I try. And in this project, especially Bardo, we did all the fittings ahead of the game, because
Sure.
It's so specific, and the colors, and also another thing that we did, we put ourselves a law that we couldn't use more than 20% of patterns in each atmosphere that we created. So when we were doing all the fittings, we had to edit to say, we already crossed that border, take that one out, and we will revise all the boards that we were doing for Alejandro. With Darius and Caballero, we will sit down and look at the whole scene and boards, and even, when we were shooting, it was kind of painting the scene, we will move people around to say, there are 3 yellows together, separate them, they're this or that. So it's the first film that you had to be like always there, like moving things, because maybe the PAs, they don't know, it's not their fault, but I'm like, just move. I'm going to get in your way. But yeah, I think for me, the most important thing to design a film and to be creating what I want, I could not do it without my amazing and beautiful team.
Well, yeah, I just can't imagine how much work Bardo must have been, just and how many people. And I love that idea, the idea that you're every scene is a painting and you move people around based on the color. I mean, I love that. That's fantastic. Well,
yeah, for me that was Bardo. Like, somebody asked me, and I was like, I just felt like we painted each scene,
each shot.
Each shot. O sea, Alejandro, as he's a director that has like very meticulous in detail, we all had to be in his level, and the way we shot the film with those lenses that you could see everything, so we had to be very careful with the corner with this. So it was, for me, it was a painting scenario.
Well, I mean, working with him, he's such a visionary, and looking at his other films, I mean, every single frame is always perfect in his movies. I can't even imagine what that was like it must have been so exciting every day to work on Bardo, because knowing that you have this many artists you're all working together to create, every shot has to be perfect. And I mean, sometimes in independent cinema, you get what you get. But when you have the time and you have the people that you're working with, you never have to compromise. That must have been a joy.
Yeah, that's also another thing that you just mentioned. Like, when you have the time, to have the time and look, because sometimes you don't, and you just have to go with what you have. And for more than, you're like, please, can we just go back and change that? No, it's done, And this one, I mean, yeah, it was also overwhelming. I mean, working for my first time with Iñárritu, that I admire, and with Darius, I was like, oh my God, like now it's another point of my life that I was like, wow, intimidated by that.
Well, listen, before we wrap up, I'd love to ask you, a lot of people listen to this show and they want to know, well, I, would love to get into to do what you do. What advice can you give to people who might want to get into this business?
To really follow their heart, to really work as a team, to be open always to others, people advice, to learn every day, to go out in the streets and learn, open your eyes. There's so much out there, that for me, that's my main inspiration. Like going out to the streets, see what's happening, reading books, going to museums, being on top of the art world, of the cinema, and more than anything, create a beautiful team. This world, I think it has become a little bit very solo situation, and I think we need to go back into be humans and to grab each other and trust the other person, and for me, that's how I was raised, and I still believe. And yeah, let's just go back to be a little bit more human beings again, less machines.
That's great advice. And of course, no one makes movies by themselves, and to have a team. Yeah, nobody. Now, can people follow you on social media? Are you on Instagram?
I'm on Instagram. My name is Atongo, Atongo.
And all right, well then, Ana Terrazas, this has been so great to speak with you. And Bardo, false Chronicle of a Handful of Truths, opens in the United States in December 16th, I believe. So everybody should go see it. And I can't wait for the whole world to see your work, because judging from what I've seen, it looks to be absolutely spectacular. Now, let me ask you my last question. What's next for you?
I am about to start designing a new project here in Mexico with Rodrigo Prieto. He will be directing and also will be the DP of Pedro Páramo, which is one of the most iconic Mexican novels, and it's based in 1890s in Mexico.
Oh, how much fun is that going to be?
Oh, yeah, it is. We have a huge challenge because for Mexico, Pedro Páramo, for everybody, I mean, we all read it when we were in high school. Everybody has their vision of Pedro Páramo. So we have a huge challenge, but I'm really excited.
Well, that's very exciting. We'll have to look out for that. Well, Ana, thank you so much for being here on the Designing Hollywood podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And take care.
Thanks. That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was good.
That was a lot of fun. And man, again, you're incredibly talented. I'm a huge fan of yours. And boy, I really, what was it like for an actor to, on the set of The Deuce, hearing you say that? It has to smell right. I'm sure.
No, imagine Maggie Gyllenhaal, in that scene where it was in every newspaper, and the next day that we shot that with that tiny little mini teeny skirt.
Oh yeah.
She was like, maybe you went a little bit too far, and I was like, yeah, I did. Just go out there, But yeah, I mean, we had again a beautiful cast, and when we did the pilot with Michelle, and we really, I mean, my first conversation with her and with David and George, it was, we need to be real. We're not here to create beautiful characters that people will believe. We're here to remember what it was, and to put the dirtiness. And I remember that at some point they were like, they weren't going to take that project, but then they knew that it wasn't just talking about, pimps and all that. It was a lot more political. And yeah, I mean, it was fantastic. It was truly one of the most projects that I enjoyed doing. And yeah, it was hard also with the actors.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. Well, listen, I don't want to take up all your time. I want to thank you so much. That was such a great interview, and we'll get this up probably in the next week. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Take care, and I get back to work.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
And a special thanks to our sponsor, Paris Costumes. Paris Costumes has been a part of the history of the European theater, film, and television industry since 1856 and has become 21st century tailors. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeekSingularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.